This isn't a movie. Operation Absolute Resolve is the first time America has extracted a sitting foreign leader since Manuel Noriega in 1989. 150 jets, Delta Force operators, a blacked-out capital, and it was over in 27 minutes. But here's what nobody's talking about. While Venezuelans are celebrating in the streets, every non-nuclear nation just became a little less sovereign. China, Russia, and Iran condemned this as a flagrant violation of international law, but they can't do anything about it. And legally, the US isn't just saying this was justified, they're saying they can do it again, to anyone, anywhere. 3 questions we need to answer. How did the US legally justify invading a sovereign nation to arrest its president? What's the actual doctrine that makes this repeatable? And why does every country on Earth now have to recalculate their risk? In the next 23 minutes, you're going to understand the legal geography of regime change, the framework America has been building for 37 years that makes operations like this not just possible, but precedent. We'll show you the exact timeline, how they cut the power, neutralized air defenses, and breached steel doors in a fortified compound. We'll map the legal loopholes from Noriega to Bin Laden to Maduro. And by the end, you'll see why this operation changes everything and nothing, because the doctrine that justified it has been hiding in plain sight since 1989. But first, we need to go back to Panama. The 3 jurisdictions that don't exist. International law says sovereignty ends at borders. Your laws, your territory, your rules. But there's a loophole most people don't know exists. The US legal system recognizes 2 types of jurisdiction, prescriptive and enforcement. Prescriptive means you can write laws that apply anywhere. Enforcement means you can actually go arrest someone. Here's the trick. The US claims that if a crime anywhere in the world affects Americans, US law applies. Drug trafficking that reaches Miami, US jurisdiction. Financial fraud that touches New York banks, US jurisdiction. And the question isn't whether they can prescribe these laws. Courts already said yes to that. The question is, can they enforce them on foreign soil? December 20th, 1989. The answer becomes yes. Operation Just Cause, 27,000 US troops invade Panama. The target? Manuel Noriega, military dictator and former CIA asset turned cocaine trafficker. The justifications sound familiar. Drug trafficking threatens American security, democracy needs restoration, national interests at stake. Noriega gets arrested, dragged to Miami, tried in federal court, sentenced to 40 years. But here's what matters. Noriega's lawyers argued extraterritorial arrest violates international law. The court's response. The conduct in Panama resulted in direct effect within the United States. That phrase, direct effect, becomes the master key. If your actions touch America, America can touch you. Anywhere. And that's when Bill Barr wrote the memo that changes everything. The Secret Doctrine. June 21st, 1989, 6 months before Panama. Attorney General Bill Barr puts it in writing. The President has inherent constitutional authority under Article 2 to order extraterritorial arrests of foreign nationals, even when it violates international law, even when the foreign government objects, even when there's no treaty. This is the Venezuela Doctrine before it has a name. Article 2 grants the President Commander-in-Chief powers. A federal indictment establishes direct effect on U.S. interests. Combined, authorization to use military force anywhere on Earth. Not invasion, not war. Arrest. The legal architecture is elegant. You're not violating sovereignty. You're extending jurisdiction. You're not starting a war. You're executing a warrant. And international law? The memo explicitly says the President's authority exists even when it violates international law. Noriega established the precedent. Bin Laden normalized it, Maduro codifies it. Follow the oil and the votes. But why Venezuela? Why now? The legal framework existed for 37 years. What changed? March 2020, The U.S. Justice Department indicts Maduro on narco-terrorism charges. The accusation, working with Colombian cartels to ship 280 tons of cocaine into the United States. To understand the scale, that's $8.4 billion in street value, enough to fund Venezuela's entire healthcare system for 3 years. But the real target wasn't the drugs. Enter the second Trump administration. Venezuela holds the world's largest proven oil reserves, 303 billion barrels, more than Saudi Arabia. Trump's post-operation statement includes this line: reclaim vital energy assets. Not liberate, reclaim. And here's the strategic calculation that makes 2026 different from 2020. Different risk tolerance, different priorities, different moment. The domestic politics matter too. Florida's Venezuelan diaspora, a critical swing state demographic, has been demanding action against Maduro for years. Tough on dictators plays well in an election cycle. Low U.S. casualty risk with special operations. No ICC jurisdiction over American personnel, unlike interventions where international courts could complicate things. The authorization comes from Mar-a-Lago, hours before the strike. The nuclear exception. Here's what makes Operation Absolute Resolve possible. Venezuela doesn't have nuclear weapons. That single fact changes everything. Venezuela's air defenses got neutralized in 30 minutes. Trump later described using certain expertise to blind Caracas's radar systems. But you can't blind a nuclear deterrent. You can't special ops your way past an ICBM, the implicit rule that governs everything. This tactic only works on non-nuclear states. Russia condemned it. China demanded Maduro's immediate release. Iran called it armed aggression. None of them sent troops. None of them risked confrontation. Because the power asymmetry is too extreme. They can file complaints at the UN, where the US has veto power. They can issue statements, but they cannot intervene. And this is where the Noriega blueprint becomes the template. Noriega claimed head of state immunity when he was arrested. Legitimate leaders can't be tried in foreign courts. The legal workaround: declare he wasn't legitimate. The US and Panama both stated Noriega wasn't the recognized head of state, just a military strongman. No immunity, no protection, just a drug trafficker with a title. Venezuela 2026 uses the exact same framework. Maduro's 2024 election was disputed. The opposition claimed victory with leaked tally sheets. International observers questioned the results. Much of the world stopped recognizing him as legitimate. Legal groundwork complete. He's not really a president, so no immunity applies. But there's one problem. Who's actually in charge of Venezuela now? Months of planning, minutes of war. Before the operation could happen in 27 minutes, it had to be planned for months. The CIA and Delta Force built something extraordinary. A full-scale replica of Venezuela's Fuerte Tiuna military compound. Every steel door, every safe room, every security checkpoint. Operators practiced the breach sequence hundreds of times until it became muscle memory. A CIA source embedded inside the Venezuelan security apparatus provided real-time intelligence. Satellite imagery tracked Maduro's daily movements for weeks, identifying patterns, vulnerabilities, optimal strike windows. Where he slept. When he moved between locations, which guards stayed loyal, which ones might stand down. While the public narrative painted Maduro as entrenched and protected, 150 aircraft were being staged at 20 air bases across the Caribbean and Colombia. F-22 Raptors for air superiority, AC-130 gunships for precision strikes, CH-47 Chinooks for insertion, V-22 Ospreys for extraction. The 2020 indictment provided the legal foundation. Now it just needed Trump's signature. The authorization came hours before launch. The timing wasn't random. 2:01 a.m. Caracas time meant maximum darkness, minimum visibility, skeletal security staffing, government buildings operating at lowest capacity, streets empty. Response time measured in confusion, not minutes. The exit strategy was already positioned. USS Iwo Jima sitting in international waters, waiting. The entire operation designed around one principle: get in, get Maduro and his wife Tilia Flores, also indicted, get out before Venezuela could mount a response. How to steal a country in 150 minutes. 02:00 a.m. The power grid dies. Trump later indicated the US had cut power to Caracas, describing the scene as dark and deadly. Whether through cyber attack or kinetic strike on infrastructure, the effect was immediate. Radar systems relying on electrical power, blind. Communications infrastructure severed. Street lights out. Air defense batteries offline. The purpose wasn't just tactical advantage. It was psychological. When your capital goes dark and aircraft appear overhead simultaneously, you assume you're under total assault. Defenders don't know if it's an invasion or a raid. That confusion buys minutes. And minutes are everything. 02:01 a.m., 150 aircraft launch simultaneously. This isn't a single target raid, it's coordinated suppression of an entire national defense network. La Carlota Air Base, hit. Fuerte Tiuna Command Center, hit. Air defense batteries ringing the capital, hit. Surface-to-air missile sites, hit. The goal? Create a bubble of air superiority so complete that not a single Venezuelan jet can scramble. Trump's post-operation briefing included this line: "The radars of Caracas were largely off due to a certain expertise that we possess." That expertise, electronic warfare, cyber capabilities, precision strikes, meant Venezuela's military never saw the helicopters coming. By the time alarms started sounding, Delta Force was already over the city. 02:15 a.m. The breach begins. Two objectives simultaneously: the presidential residence and Fuerte Tiuna military compound, where Maduro had fortified safe rooms. Intelligence suggested he'd be at one of these locations. Delta Force operators hit both. Charges blow through steel doors. Flashbang grenades disorient security personnel. Rules of engagement: capture, not kill. Maduro and Cilia Flores were attempting to reach the fortified safe room when operators intercepted them. The entire breach sequence, from landing to securing targets, takes 13 minutes. No reported U.S. casualties. Minimal Venezuelan military resistance because they still don't understand what's happening. Is it a coup? An invasion? A raid? The confusion is intentional. 02:28 a.m. Extraction complete. 27 minutes total. Maduro and Flores are secured in a helicopter, heading to USS Iwo Jima in international waters. Behind them, Caracas is still dark. Venezuelan military command is trying to establish communication with units that either can't respond or don't know what orders to follow. By the time air defense systems come back online, the helicopters are over water. Untouchable. The transport phase is clinical. Helicopter to carrier, carrier to U.S. mainland via aircraft. By Saturday afternoon, less than 72 hours after being president of Venezuela, Maduro is in New York federal custody. The photo that goes viral shows him on the naval vessel, wearing civilian clothes, hands secured. Hours ago, he commanded a nation. Now he's reading Miranda rights, the constitutional crisis nobody expected. January 4th, 2026. Venezuela has 3 presidents simultaneously. Article 234 of Venezuela's constitution is clear. If the president is absent, incapacitated, or unable to perform duties, the vice president assumes office. Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's VP, takes the oath. Problem: she was part of the government that much of the world considers illegitimate. Her assumption of power doesn't resolve the crisis, it multiplies it. The Constitution also requires new elections within 30 days if the president cannot resume office. But the National Assembly, the body that would organize these elections, was also elected in Maduro's disputed process. So who has authority to call elections? And who decides which voters are eligible? The legal framework has collapsed into recursive illegitimacy. Opposition leader Edmundo Gonzalez claims he won the 2024 presidential election. Leaked tally sheets from polling stations support this. International observers back the opposition's numbers. Gonzalez is in exile, but maintains he's the rightful president under democratic law. He has legitimacy, but no power. Maria Corina Machado, the opposition's de facto leader inside Venezuela, argues only Gonzalez has constitutional legitimacy. She's calling for immediate recognition and transfer of power, but she has no mechanism to enforce this claim. Political authority without institutional control. And then Trump makes the declaration that reveals the real plan. The United States will run Venezuela during the transition. Not support, not advise, run. This wasn't regime change in the traditional sense, overthrowing one government to install another. This is regime replacement with direct U.S. oversight. The comparison everyone's avoiding, Iraq 2003. Occupation, not liberation. The question determining Venezuela's future. Is this Panama or Iraq? In Panama, the U.S. left quickly after installing a friendly government. In Iraq, occupation lasted years and destabilized the region. Trump's statement suggests something in between, prolonged oversight without formal occupation. But how long? Who decides when Venezuela is ready to govern itself? And what happens to the oil contracts China signed with Maduro's government? The legitimacy trap has no clean exit. Recognize Rodriguez and you validate Maduro's system. Recognize Gonzalez and you're deciding elections from Washington. Maintain U.S. oversight and you're occupying a sovereign nation. Each option violates some principle of international law, which means the decision becomes purely strategic, not legal. The new risk calculus. Every leader with a U.S. federal indictment or ICC warrant just opened a new spreadsheet. The calculation changed overnight. It's no longer, can they sanction me? It's, can they extract me? The precedent is explicit. Federal indictment plus special operations capability equals extraction risk. The limiting assumption, and this is critical, only works on non-nuclear states. Putin has nuclear weapons. So does North Korea, Pakistan, China. They're watching this operation, but they're not personally vulnerable. The leaders who need to worry? Everyone else. Behavioral patterns are already shifting. Dictators don't just calculate sanctions and frozen assets anymore. They calculate physical safety. The security premium for staying in power just increased dramatically. More guards, fewer public appearances, fortified compounds. And the nuclear option, literally, starts looking more rational. China demands Maduro's immediate release. Russia calls it armed aggression. Iran says it's a flagrant violation of sovereignty. Strong language, zero intervention. But here's what they did do. Within 72 hours, Chinese naval vessels appeared in the Caribbean. Russian bombers flew reconnaissance near Florida. Not attacks, probes, testing whether America would treat the Caribbean as a no-fly zone for rivals. The condemnation reveals the system's actual rules. Powerful states can object loudly as long as they don't act militarily. But the positioning? That's the real response? The lesson isn't just about Venezuela, it's about revealed preference. When it mattered, the countries condemning U.S. action chose not to escalate. That choice defines the actual power structure. Objection without consequence is permission. The sovereignty tax. But here's the unintended consequence. Every nation without nuclear weapons just got more interested in acquiring them. The nuclear imperative becomes obvious. Venezuela got raided because it couldn't fight back. North Korea hasn't been raided because it can. Iran's nuclear program, constantly criticized and sanctioned, suddenly looks like rational insurance policy. The operation meant to project American strength might accelerate the one thing that limits American power: nuclear proliferation. International law scholars are being very careful with their language. They're saying this violates international law while acknowledging it sets operational precedent. The Bilbao Memo logic made it explicit back in 1989. Presidential authority exists even when it violates international law. What's the point of international law if the most powerful country openly states it doesn't apply? The precedent problem runs deeper. If the U.S. can arrest foreign leaders on its domestic legal authority, Why can't China arrest Taiwanese officials it claims are criminals? Why can't Russia extract dissidents living in exile? The framework being established here, our laws apply everywhere if we say they do, becomes available to any country with sufficient military power. Venezuela's oil contracts reveal the economic realignment. China invested more than $60 billion in Venezuelan oil infrastructure under Maduro's government. Those contracts assumed government continuity. Now they're in limbo. Who honors which agreements? Does U.S. oversight mean Chinese companies get frozen out? Energy markets are recalculating. If the U.S. gains access to Venezuelan oil reserves, 300 to 3 billion barrels, that changes global supply dynamics. OPEC loses leverage. Oil prices face downward pressure. And every country dependent on energy exports watches their strategic position weaken. The operation wasn't just about Maduro, it was about resetting the board. The geography of accountability. Here's what Operation Absolute Resolve reveals. Sovereignty isn't a legal status, it's a military capability. The Venezuela Doctrine combines three elements that were always there, just never stated this explicitly. Noriega precedent from 1989 plus post-9/11 counterterrorism norms plus nuclear monopoly equals legal extraction. The formula is repeatable. Indictment establishes direct effect on U.S. interests. Special operations capability enables extraction. Nuclear deterrent absence removes existential risk. Result: operations like this become tactically feasible and legally defensible, at least in U.S. courts. International law, in this framework, is enforced by power rather than courts. The UN Security Council can't act because the US has veto power. The International Criminal Court can't prosecute US personnel because America isn't a signatory. There's no enforcement mechanism that can hold the US accountable. The system isn't rules-based international order. It's rules for some, power for others. The uncomfortable truth: this isn't new. It's been true since Panama. Noriega established the precedent that extraterritorial arrest is legal. Bin Laden's 2011 killing normalized sovereignty violations in counterterrorism operations. Maduro codifies it into repeatable doctrine. What changed isn't the system, it's the willingness to use it explicitly rather than quietly. At 2:01 a.m., America didn't kidnap a president. They revealed the system that's always existed. Remember the paradox? Venezuelans celebrating while the world condemns? Here's what that reveals. The Venezuela Doctrine works because it separates legitimacy from legality. Maduro's government lacked legitimacy. Disputed election, human rights abuses, international non-recognition. So when the US acted illegally under international law, most of the world shrugged. The doctrine isn't written in a treaty. It's not in the UN Charter. It's written in capability. 150 aircraft, 27 minutes, 0 consequences beyond verbal condemnations. That's the real law, the law of who can do what to whom. Let's close the loop. Remember those 3 questions from the start? Legal justification. The Barr Memo from 1989, repeatable doctrine. Federal indictment plus special ops capability. Why every country recalculates risk. Nuclear weapons are the only immunity. So what happens next? Watch Venezuela's constitutional crisis closely. If Delcy Rodriguez holds elections within 30 days like the Constitution requires, it legitimizes the U.S. action retroactively, proving the system works. If she doesn't, if the U.S. maintains oversight indefinitely, then you're watching occupation unfold in real time. Iraq 2.0 with better branding. But the bigger question: who's next? Every dictator with a U.S. federal indictment just recalculated their security posture. Not just sanctions, not just frozen assets, physical extraction risk. Some will seek nuclear weapons as insurance. Others will fortify even further. Some might negotiate. The dynamic changed. China and Russia condemned this operation, but they're also watching and learning. If the framework is domestic legal authority plus military capability equals extraterritorial enforcement, that template can be replicated. The precedent might protect American power in the short term. Long term, It might justify exactly what you're trying to prevent. The oil contract China just lost, $60 billion in infrastructure investments, decades of agreements, becomes someone else's asset overnight. Next video, we're mapping exactly where that money went, which companies are positioned to take over. We found the 3 American companies that filed to take over Chinese oil infrastructure 48 hours after Maduro's extraction. That's not coincidence, that's preparation. The operation took 27 minutes. The legal framework took 37 years to build. And the consequences? Those will take decades to fully understand. Because the Venezuela Doctrine isn't just about Venezuela. It's about the legal geography of power in a world where sovereignty has asterisks, where international law applies selectively, where capability determines legitimacy. If you want to understand how the world actually works, not how we're told it works, this channel breaks down the systems hiding in plain sight. The frameworks built over decades that suddenly matter when 150 aircraft light up the night sky over a darkened capital. We'll be following the succession crisis, the constitutional negotiations, and the next time this precedent gets used. Because it will be used again, the doctrine is repeatable, the capability is proven. And 27 minutes is all it takes to change the rules. The question isn't whether America could do this, it's whether they should have. And now that the world knows they will, what changes? Everything and nothing.